And I want to read to you from Luke chapter 8, the beginning of the story. I'm going to read verses 26 through 28. The story actually goes down through verse 39. So let us listen to the words of Luke. Jesus and his disciples sailed to the Gerasenes land, which is across the lake from Galilee. As soon as Jesus got out of the boat, a certain man met him. The man was from the city and was possessed by demons. For a long time he had lived among the tombs, naked and homeless. When he saw Jesus, he shrieked and fell down before him. Then he shouted, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." In our story today, we have Jesus entering into the Badlands. He's leaving his home area. He's leaving Judea. He's left the people with whom he is familiar. He's leaving a Jewish area. He goes across the lake to the city of the Gerasenes. These are Gentiles. He's dealing with people who have different values, different beliefs, in some ways a different culture from where he grew up and where his friends and family would be. This is a story of Jesus meeting a man who is possessed by demons. This is one of several what we call exorcism stories in the New Testament. An exorcist was one who cast out demons. Before we go any further in looking at the story, I want us to kind of step back and think about this idea of demon possession as it was viewed in the ancient world and how people tried to deal with their belief system about demons. You see, it doesn't make any difference what you and I believe or don't believe about demon possession because the story was written in another time. And so what is important for us to understand is what they believed about demons and what they understood so we can get into the story. In the ancient world, people believed that demons were very active. And the way ancient people tried to deal and understand with strange and bizarre behavior was with the belief that people were possessed by demons. So if a person acted in a strange manner, if a person looked and behaved in strange ways, whether that be mentally or physically, if a person seemed kind of out of the norm, somebody who was kind of unusual, or maybe somebody who was frightening to the general group of the population, it was assumed that those kinds of people were possessed by demons. And the ancient people were very afraid of that and afraid of demon possession. They believed that demons were kind of concentrated in cemeteries. And in our story today, this man who's demon possessed lives in a cemetery. People believed that demons were active about and kind of flying around in space. You couldn't see them, but they would try to find their homes and people. They believed that demon activity was particularly great during the nighttime. And they also believed that demons were very, very powerful in like the full moon. And so people were concerned that these demons were flying around. They would take possession of their bodies. And so there were gifted healers in the ancient world who had the ability to make these people who were different either better or maybe well. And so they were called exorcists. Now, not every healer was an exorcist, but every exorcist in that fashion was a healer. And it's very obvious that Jesus was recognized as one of these kinds of healers. Not that Jesus didn't also do other kinds of healings, but he was seen as an exorcist. And there are different stories like this in the Gospels. So if you take all these stories out you're going to have a big gap in the stories of Jesus having a healing ministry. Now, this particular story that we're reading today is unique to Luke. We don't find it in Matthew, Mark, and John. It's only in Luke. And just kind of as a information point of biblical understanding, this is the longest exorcism story in the Gospels. It goes from Luke chapter 8, verses 26 through 29. So what do we as 21st century people make of these stories that seem so really foreign to the way we understand illnesses and things like that today? What I think the story is telling us in the Gospels, or the Gospels in totality, is that Jesus, when he came to this world, met people where they were. He entered into the culture in which people lived. He lived within the belief systems of the people to whom he was rendering ministry. And so therefore he steps into this world. And I think the bigger picture of what Jesus is doing is that Jesus is trying to heal. He's trying to help people who are sick to get well. That's the overriding thing. So kind of keep that as an understanding of what's going on here. Now, with that being said, let's look at the story. What we have is an encounter of Jesus with a man who is very disturbed, to say the least. We are told in the story that the man's name is Legion. And he tells Jesus that his name is Legion because he is filled with many demons. The word legion in the Roman world was a cohort of 6,000 Roman soldiers. So to say that his name is Legion because he's filled with many demons, so a legion is like 6,000 soldiers. So this man has major problems. He is, what we would say today, he's messed up big time. And so as he's described by Luke in the story, he's living in a cemetery, which I said was a place where ancient people believed that demons were very active. He's running around naked, doesn't have any clothes on. He's homeless. And that not only means that he doesn't have a place to live, I think it also implies that he has been rejected by his family. They are probably afraid of him and maybe embarrassed to call this man a member of their family. So he is isolated. He's cut off. And Luke tells us in this story that he's two words that Luke uses is he's shrieking and he's screaming. And we're also told in this story that the people in the city tried to bind him with chains. But he had this superhuman strength. And he would break loose of the chains and run off into the wilderness. So here's a man who is out of control. We would say he is insane in our way of thinking. So people are avoiding this man. They are afraid of this man. And because of that, he is an isolated individual, living in terrible emotional bondage. But in this story, Legion confesses Jesus. And that's an interesting thing about a lot of these exorcism stories. The demons in people know who Jesus is. I think that's just very interesting. And so the demon-possessed man says to Jesus, he calls him the Son of the Most High God. Confesses him as Son of God. He knows that. And yet his conviction is very distorted. Because he says to Jesus right after he says that you are the Son of the Most High God, he says to him, "Don't torture me." So he doesn't see Jesus as a deliverer. He sees Jesus potentially as a torturer. And it kind of reminds us that our faith can be either healthy or unhealthy, right? We can have a healthy belief system or an unhealthy belief system. Well, this man believes Jesus is the Son of God, but his belief system is extremely unhealthy because he sees Jesus as a torturer, not as a deliverer. And then Jesus asks him his name. And that's where we find out his name is Legion, because he's filled with many demons. But I think that's really kind of insightful about Jesus. What's your name? I wonder how long it had been since anybody had ever asked this pitiful individual, "Who are you? What is your name?" You see, everybody tried to avoid him. People were afraid of him. People had dehumanized him, looked at him like some kind of a monster. But Jesus humanizes him. This wild man is still a human being who's made in the image of God. And Jesus humanizes him and asks him, "What is your name?" And then we see this tremendous transformation where Jesus heals Legion. Now, I'm not going to tell you the whole story because I want you to go home and read it. The story, the way Luke tells this story of the exorcism is really exciting. It's really, really a neat story. So you go home and read that story. Now, I'm going to skip that part and just go down to what happens afterwards. After Jesus casts out the demons and the people come around, Legion is now healthy. We're told that he's sitting at Jesus' feet. And that means not just he was sitting at Jesus' feet, but that's a figure of speech saying that he was listening to Jesus' teaching. So he's become a disciple. The word disciple means a learner. He's sitting at the feet of Jesus, listening to what Jesus says. He's become a disciple of Christ. We're told now he's fully dressed. Not naked anymore, he's dressed. Luke tells us that now he is completely sane. And that's the term that Luke uses. He's sane. He's not running around shrieking and screaming and breaking loose of chains and all that kind of stuff. Now he is completely sane. But the people in the land of the Gerasenes, this is very unsettling to them. This is, they don't know what to make of this. So Luke tells us that the people of that community came to Jesus and said, "We would like for you to leave because we're afraid." A lot of fear in this story. Legion was afraid, and the people are afraid of Legion, and now the people are afraid of Jesus. So they asked Jesus to leave. And he does. As I was thinking about that, it reminded me of a quotation in the book of Revelation, Revelation chapter 3, where it describes Jesus standing at the door knocking, where John, the writer of Revelation, is using that as a figure of speech that Jesus wants to come in, but he's standing at the door knocking, waiting for somebody to invite him in. The picture is that Jesus only comes where he's invited. If you don't want him, he doesn't come. He doesn't kick down the door. He stands and knocks and waits for somebody to let him in. So Jesus does not come where he's not wanted. He wants to be in your life. He's knocking at the door, but he's waiting for you to answer the door. And if you don't answer the door, if you're like the people in the land of the Gerasenes and ask him to leave, that's your choice. He only comes where he's invited. And Legion, as Jesus is getting ready to leave, begs Jesus, "Let me come with you. I want to go back to Judea and be with you." But Jesus told him to stay. And Jesus said to him, "I want you to stay here, and I want you to go tell the people here what God has done for you. And that's what Legion did. He stayed in the land of the Gerasenes and went about telling people what God had done for him. And that's the end of the story. There's two major characters in this story, and I think both of these characters speak to us today in the modern world.